He planted flowers, but he grew in her heart. I wasn't supposed to feel this way. Not after everything. Not after him. My husband's garden, the one he poured his soul into, had withered under my neglect. For 2 years I let it die, just like a part of me had. The roses he loved, the ones he'd tend to with such care, turned brittle and brown. The lilies drooped, their petals falling like tears I couldn't shed anymore. That garden was his heart, his sanctuary, and when he died, it felt like the earth itself stopped breathing. Then came the gardener, Elliot, with his quiet hands and eyes that seemed to see right through my grief. He wasn't just fixing the garden. He was fixing me. And that terrified me. Because every time he brushed dirt off his hands or looked at me a little too long, I felt something stir. Something I thought was buried with my husband. A warmth, a pull, a whisper of life I wasn't sure I deserved. I'm Emily, and this is the story of how I betrayed my own heart. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stop it. Elliot was younger, too young, some might say, 12 years my junior. His presence was a soft intrusion, a warmth I didn't know how to handle. Each morning, I'd watch him from the kitchen window, his silhouette moving through the mist, tending to roses that hadn't bloomed in years. His hands moved with a kind of reverence, like he was coaxing the earth back to life, and I'd wonder, was I tending to something too? Or was I just digging up pain? The thing about grief is it's a jealous lover. It clings to you, whispers that you don't get to feel anything else. It wraps itself around your heart, heavy and unyielding, reminding you of every moment you lost. But Elliot, he didn't ask for permission. He just showed up, day after day, with his calloused hands and quiet questions. "Do you want the lilies here?" he'd ask, his voice soft, steady, and I'd hear something else entirely. "Do you want to let yourself live again?" I didn't know how to answer. Not then. Not when every step toward him felt like a step away from my husband's memory. Can love bloom where grief still lingers? I didn't think so. But as the garden came back to life, so did pieces of me. And that's where the trouble started. Because the closer I got to Elliot, the louder the guilt screamed. Was I allowed to want this? To want him? Or was I just a widow, fooling herself into believing she could start again? I used to wake up to the sound of my husband, James, humming in the garden. His hands were always covered in soil, his smile brighter than the sunflowers he loved. He'd spend hours out there, pruning, planting, talking to the plants like they could hear him. That garden was his heart, his sanctuary, a place where he could be himself in a way the rest of the world never saw. When he died, it felt like the earth itself stopped breathing. The roses wilted, their petals curling inward like they were mourning him too. The lilies drooped, their delicate white heads bowing to the ground. And I just let it happen. I couldn't bear to touch it. Every petal, every blade of grass, reminded me of him, of the life we'd built, of the promises we'd made. 2 years passed, and the garden became a graveyard of memories I couldn't face. I'd walk past it every day, the overgrown weeds mocking me, the tangled vines a mirror of the chaos inside me. I told myself I didn't care, that it didn't matter, but every time I looked out the window, I saw him. His hands in the dirt, his laughter in the breeze. And it hurt too much to bear. I hired Elliot on a whim. A friend suggested it, said the garden could be saved, that it might help me heal. I didn't believe her. Healing felt like a betrayal, like admitting James was really gone. But I was tired of seeing the decay every time I looked out the window, tired of the reminder that I'd let his legacy die. So, I called the number she gave me. Elliot showed up the next day, a man in his late 20s with a quiet voice and eyes that seemed to carry their own kind of sadness. He didn't talk much, just nodded when I showed him the overgrown mess. "I'll take care of it," he said, his voice calm but certain. And somehow, I believed him. He started coming every morning. I'd watch from the kitchen, clutching my coffee, as he knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds, pruning branches, coaxing life back into the soil. There was something about his focus, the way he handled each plant with care, that made me feel seen. Like he wasn't just tending to the garden, but to the parts of me I'd let wither. I didn't know much about him at first. Just his name, his age, 29, 12 years younger than me, and the way he seemed to understand silence. He didn't push me to talk, didn't ask about the wedding ring I still wore. He just worked, and I watched, and slowly, something shifted. One morning, he caught me staring. I blushed, fumbling with my mug, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. But he just smiled, a small, knowing curve of his lips that made my stomach twist. "You loved this garden once, didn't you?" he said. Not a question, really. A statement. I nodded, my throat tight, the words catching before they could form. "It was his," I whispered, barely audible. Elliot didn't say anything, just went back to his work, his hands moving with that same quiet care. But that moment stayed with me. It was the first time I'd spoken about James without crying. And it scared me how easy it felt. Days turned into weeks, and Elliot became a fixture in my life. Not just the gardener, but something else. Something I couldn't name, didn't dare name. He'd bring me clippings of flowers, leave them on the porch with a note. "For you." Simple, handwritten, the ink smudged from his fingers. I'd find myself waiting for those notes, for the sound of his truck pulling into the driveway, the low rumble that broke the silence of my mornings. I told myself it was just gratitude. He was bringing the garden back, after all. He was giving me something to look at that didn't hurt. But then I'd catch his eyes lingering on me, or I'd notice the way my heart raced when he said my name, Emily, soft and deliberate, like he was tasting it. And I'd wonder, what was I doing? I was a widow, still tethered to a ghost. He was too young, too alive, too everything I wasn't. But the garden was blooming again. Vibrant roses, their petals unfurling like they'd been waiting for permission. Delicate lilies, standing tall against the wind. Sunflowers reaching for the sky, their golden heads catching the light. And with every flower, I felt myself unraveling. I started talking to him more, small things at first, like the weather, or how James used to love the smell of lavender. Elliot listened, really listened, his eyes soft but piercing, like he could see the weight I carried. One day, he told me about his own loss, his mother, gone too soon when he was just a teenager. "Grief doesn't leave," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It just makes room for other things." I wanted to ask what he meant, but I didn't. I was too afraid of the answer, too afraid of what it might mean for me, for us. It was a late summer evening when everything changed. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine, and the garden glowed under the fading light, its colors softened by the dusk. Elliot was finishing up, his shirt damp with sweat, his hands stained with earth. I brought him a glass of water, like I'd done a dozen times before. But this time, when he took it, his fingers brushed mine. It wasn't an accident. I felt it, the warmth, the intention, the quiet electricity that sparked between us. My breath caught, and I looked away, but not before I saw his eyes. They weren't just kind anymore. They were hungry, searching, filled with something that made my heart pound in a way it hadn't in years. "Thank you, Emily," he said, his voice low, like he was sharing a secret. I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs, and turned to go back inside, desperate to escape the weight of that moment. But he spoke again, his words stopping me in my tracks. "You don't have to keep running from it." I froze, my back to him, my hands trembling. "From what?" I asked, though I knew. I knew exactly what he meant. He didn't answer right away, just set the glass down on the porch railing with a soft clink. When he spoke again, his voice was closer, softer. "From whatever this is." I turned, and he was there, not too close, but close enough that I could feel the heat of him, the quiet pull of his presence. I should have walked away. I should have said something sharp, something to put distance between us, to rebuild the walls I'd so carefully maintained. But I didn't. I stood there, my hands trembling, my mind screaming at me to stop. This was wrong. James was gone, but his memory wasn't. I still wore his ring, its weight a constant reminder of the vows I'd made. I still woke up to his absence every morning, the empty side of the bed a silent accusation. And yet, here was Elliot, with his steady gaze and his calloused hands, making me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. "I'm not. I can't," I stammered, the words feeling hollow even as I said them. He didn't push, didn't say anything else. He just nodded, like he understood, and went back to his work, his hands moving through the dirt with that same quiet care. But the air had changed. It was heavier now, charged with something unspoken, something I couldn't unfeel. I couldn't unsee the way he looked at me, the way his eyes held mine, like he was seeing not just the widow, but the woman I used to be. The next day, I told myself I'd keep my distance. I'd stay inside, let him work, let this, whatever it was, fade into the background. But I couldn't. I found myself at the window again, watching him as he knelt in the garden, his hands gentle with the roses, his focus unwavering. And when he glanced up, catching my eye, I didn't look away. I held his gaze, and something in me broke open. Guilt flooded in, sharp and relentless, but so did something else, something warm, something reckless, something that felt dangerously like hope. I wanted to know what it would feel like to let go. To let him in. Over the next few weeks, our conversations grew deeper, more intimate. He'd tell me about his life, his dreams of owning a nursery someday, the way he felt most at peace with his hands in the dirt, the way he'd learned to find beauty in broken things. I told him about James, about the way we'd dance in the kitchen to old jazz records, about the plans we'd made that never came to be, about the hole in my heart that I thought would never close. And with every word, I felt the distance between us shrink. He'd linger longer after his work, sitting on the porch with me, the silence between us heavy with possibility. We'd talk about everything and nothing, the way the roses were blooming, the way the air felt cooler in the evenings, the way grief could feel like a friend and an enemy all at once. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, he reached for my hand. Not to hold it, just to trace the edge of my wedding ring with his thumb, his touch so gentle it made my chest ache. "You don't have to take it off," he said softly, his eyes meeting mine. "But you don't have to let it hold you back either." My breath caught, and I wanted to pull away, to run from the truth in his words, from the way they cut through the walls I'd built. But I didn't. I let his touch linger, let the warmth of it seep into me, let it unravel the knot of guilt and fear that had kept me tethered to the past. And for the first time, I wondered if I could love someone else without losing James. But the guilt was relentless, a shadow that followed me everywhere. Every night, I'd lie awake, picturing James's face, hearing his voice, his laughter, the way he'd call my name. What would he think of me? Of this? Elliot was so different, younger, softer, alive in a way that felt like a betrayal. And the age gap. I could already hear the whispers, the judgment. The widow and the gardener. It sounded like a scandal, a cliché, something people would gossip about over coffee. But when I was with Elliot, it didn't feel like that. It felt like coming home, like finding a piece of myself I thought I'd lost forever. The tension built with every glance, every brush of his hand, every moment we didn't say what we both felt. I started noticing things. The way his shirt clung to his shoulders after a long day, the way his laugh made my stomach flip, the way his eyes softened when he looked at me. And he noticed me too. I'd catch him watching me, his gaze tracing the curve of my neck, the way I tucked my hair behind my ear, the way I smiled when he left a new flower on the porch. It was intoxicating, terrifying, like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing one step could change everything. One day, he showed up with a single rose, its petals a deep, aching red, the kind that looked like it held a secret. "For you," he said, handing it to me, his fingers brushing mine for just a moment too long. I took it, my fingers trembling, and for a moment we just stood there, the air thick with everything we weren't saying. "Elliot," I whispered, my voice breaking, raw with everything I couldn't put into words. He stepped closer, his breath warm against my cheek, his eyes searching mine. "I'm here," he said, his voice steady but laced with something deeper, something that made my heart ache. "Whenever you're ready." And then he walked away, leaving me with the rose and a heart that didn't know how to beat anymore. I started finding excuses to be near him. I'd bring him coffee in the mornings, the steam rising from the mug as I walked out to the garden, pretending it was just a kind gesture. I'd ask about the plants, lingering longer than necessary, letting his answers, about soil pH, pruning techniques, the best time to plant lavender, wash over me like a lullaby. I'd stay on the porch after he was done, offering him a glass of iced tea, watching the way his throat moved when he drank, the way his fingers curled around the glass. Each time, I told myself it was innocent, that I was just being kind, just grateful for the work he was doing. But I wasn't fooling anyone, least of all myself. The truth was, I craved him, his voice, his presence, the way he made me feel like I wasn't just a widow, but a woman again, someone who could still be seen, still be wanted. One afternoon it rained. Not a storm, just a soft, steady drizzle that turned the garden into a shimmering haze, the petals glistening like they were crying for me. Elliot was still out there, his hair damp, his shirt sticking to his skin, outlining the lines of his shoulders, his arms. I called him inside, insisting he dry off, my voice sharper than I meant it to be, betraying the panic I felt at seeing him like that, so alive, so close. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine, but he came, stepping into my kitchen, water dripping onto the floor, leaving little pools that caught the light. I handed him a towel, my hands unsteady, and when our fingers brushed, I didn't pull away. Neither did he. We stood there, the silence stretching between us, heavy with everything we hadn't said, everything we couldn't say. "You don't have to do this alone," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, so soft it felt like a secret meant just for me. I knew he wasn't talking about the garden. My eyes burned, and I looked down at my ring, the gold glinting under the kitchen light, a reminder of everything I'd lost, everything I was afraid to lose again. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, my voice breaking, raw with the truth I'd been running from. "How to let go." He stepped closer, so close I could smell the rain on him, the earth, the life that clung to his skin. "You don't have to let go," he said, his eyes holding mine, steady and sure. "You just have to let me in." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. I wanted to reach out, to touch him, to feel the warmth of his skin under my fingers, to know what it would be like to be held again, to be seen. But the guilt was a weight I couldn't shake, a shadow that followed me everywhere. Every time I thought about Elliot, about what it would feel like to touch him, to let him touch me, I saw James. His smile, warm and familiar. His hands rough from the garden but gentle when they held me. The way he'd kiss me goodnight, his lips soft against my forehead. I wasn't ready to lose that, to let go of the man who'd been my everything. But I wasn't ready to lose Elliot either, this man who'd slipped into my life so quietly, so unexpectedly, and made me feel like I could breathe again. The days that followed were a dance of hesitation and longing, a push and pull I couldn't escape. We'd talk for hours, our conversations weaving between the past and the present, the garden and the grief, the things we'd lost and the things we still hoped for. He'd tell me stories about his childhood, about the mother he'd lost when he was 16, about the way he'd sit in her garden after she was gone, planting flowers to keep her close. I told him about the trips James and I took, the way we'd drive to the coast and walk along the shore, the dreams we had of growing old together, dreams that died with him. And with every word I felt myself falling, slowly, inevitably, into something I couldn't name, something that felt like both a lifeline and a betrayal. One evening, we sat on the porch, the air cool and thick with the scent of blooming roses, their petals catching the last light of the day. He reached for my hand, and this time, I didn't pull away. His fingers were warm, steady, callous from his work but gentle in a way that made my heart ache. I let myself feel it, the connection, the pull, the quiet promise of something new. "Emily," he said, his voice soft but urgent, like he was afraid the moment would slip away. "I'm not asking you to forget him. I'm just asking you to see me." My heart ached, torn between the man I'd lost and the man sitting beside me, his hand in mine, his eyes searching for something I wasn't sure I could give. I started to notice the way he looked at me, not just with want, but with understanding, with a patience that broke me open. He saw my pain, my fear, my guilt, and he didn't try to fix it, didn't try to erase it. He just stayed, day after day, planting flowers, leaving notes, offering me a quiet kind of hope that felt both foreign and familiar. And I started to wonder, was this what healing felt like? Not moving on, but moving forward. Not letting go of James, but making room for something else, something new. But the guilt never left. It was there in the quiet moments, in the way I'd catch myself smiling at Elliot and feel a pang of betrayal, sharp and relentless. It was there when I looked at the garden, now bursting with life, its colors vibrant and alive in a way that felt like a rebuke to my grief. I was starting to love it again, starting to love the way it made me feel, hopeful, alive, connected. And I was starting to love him, this man who'd come into my life like a quiet storm, stirring up everything I thought I knew about myself. And that scared me more than anything. Because loving Elliot meant letting go of the widow I'd been, the woman who'd built her life around loss. It meant risking judgment, risking pain, risking the whispers of a world that would never understand. It meant stepping into something new, something uncertain, something that could break me all over again. One night, I found myself in the garden alone, the moonlight casting long shadows over the roses, their petals glowing silver in the dark. I touched them, my fingers tracing the soft edges, remembering James's hands, his laughter, the way he'd look at me like I was his whole world. And then I heard Elliot's voice behind me, soft and hesitant. "You okay?" he asked. I turned, and there he was, his eyes soft, searching, filled with a warmth that made my chest tighten. I wanted to tell him everything, how I was terrified, how I wanted him, how I didn't know if I could do this, if I could let myself love again. But instead I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. And when he stepped closer, his presence steady and sure, I didn't move away. I let him stand there, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the quiet strength that had drawn me to him from the start. I don't know when I decided to let him in. Maybe it was the day he planted the last rose, the one he said reminded him of me, delicate but strong, surviving against the odds, its petals a soft pink that caught the light like a promise. Maybe it was the night he held my hand and didn't ask for more, his touch a quiet anchor in the storm of my heart. Or maybe it was the moment I realized I wasn't just grieving anymore, wasn't just surviving. I was living, really living, for the first time in years. Elliot never pushed me, never asked for promises I couldn't give, never demanded that I be anything other than what I was, a woman carrying a heart full of love and loss. But one evening, as the garden glowed under the stars, its colors softened by the night, I kissed him. It was soft, hesitant, like stepping into a new world, one I wasn't sure I belonged in. My lips brushed his, trembling, uncertain, and for a moment I thought I'd made a mistake, that I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. But then he kissed me back, his hands gentle on my face, his touch steady and sure, and it wasn't just passion, it was understanding. It was forgiveness, not just for me, but for himself, for the pain we'd both carried, the losses we'd both known. It was a moment of quiet surrender, a letting go of the fear that had held me back for so long. I still wear my ring. I probably always will. It's not a chain anymore, not a weight that keeps me tethered to the past. It's a reminder, of love, of loss, of the courage it takes to start again, to let yourself feel even when it hurts. Elliot and I, we're not a fairy tale, not some grand, sweeping romance. We're not a scandal either, not the kind of story people whisper about with raised eyebrows. We're just two people who found each other in a garden that needed saving, in hearts that needed healing. We're two people who learned that love doesn't erase the past, but it can make room for the future. I don't know what the future holds, don't know if I'm ready for everything he makes me feel, for the way he looks at me like I'm more than my grief, more than my loss. But I know I'm not running anymore. I'm here, in the garden, in the quiet, in the possibility of us. And maybe that's enough for now. Have you ever found love in an unexpected place? Comment below and share your story. If this moved you, share it with someone special. And reflect, what's the love you're afraid to embrace?